You need to know who Shemyaza was before they erase this story. You need to know who Shemyaza was, and you need to know now, before another piece of this story is erased from humanity's memory. Because Shemyaza was not just a leader. He was the angel who commanded the greatest silent rebellion ever recorded, the one responsible for a lineage that, according to ancient texts, forever changed human genetics, human spirituality, and even the ultimate destiny of the world. In this video, you will discover what really happened, why Shemyaza was so feared, why his name was hidden, and how his celestial fall was deeper, more devastating, and more dangerous than that of any other celestial being. If you watch until the end, you'll understand the truth behind the question that few dare to ask. Why did some angels choose to leave heaven? Because of humans. Before we continue, please leave a like, because this content takes days of research and only exists thanks to your support. If you enjoy delving into ancient mysteries, hidden biblical stories, and secrets that almost no one talks about, subscribe now and activate the bell so you don't miss anything. Here you will always find the truth that few dare to tell. Imagine the following scene: a young, newly formed world, where the mountains still exude the warmth of creation, where the seas shine as if made of glass, and where humanity takes its first steps, naive, fragile, without knowledge of good, evil, or even the destiny reserved for it. In this setting, beings of light observed the planet from above, celestial guardians charged with protecting humanity and guiding its first moments. They were known as the Watchers, angels sent to observe, never to interfere. But among them was a leader, a being of unquestionable authority, so powerful that his mere presence made other angels bow in respect. His name, Shemyaza, or, as some ancient manuscripts call it, Shemyaza, Shemazai. His role was to maintain order among the Watchers. He carried a heavy responsibility, for he led beings who, according to the Book of Enoch, were luminous as stars and possessed knowledge so vast that they could alter the very nature of human existence. And it was precisely this knowledge that became the breaking point. According to ancient texts, the Watchers began to be fascinated by human beings. They watched humanity grow, observed their feelings, their bonds, their emotions, something profoundly human, something that angels did not experience in the same way. The boundary between observing and desiring began to dissolve, and Shemyaza realized this before anyone else. He saw his brothers begin to question rules, to look at the earth with excessive interest, to nurture a curiosity for something that, until that moment, they were forbidden to experience. Shemyaza knew that if anything happened, he would be held responsible. He was the leader, the one responsible for maintaining the purity of the angels sent to earth. But then comes the decisive moment, the point at which the story changes forever. The manuscripts describe a dramatic scene. Shemyaza, realizing that many angels wanted to descend to earth to be with human women, tries to convince them to desist. He knew the weight of the transgression. He knew it would cost dearly. He knew there would never be a return. But the angels were determined enough to persuade Shemyaza himself. According to the Book of Enoch, it was at this moment that Shemyaza, fearing he would be the only one punished if everyone else went down, decided to do something that would change everything. He proposed a pact. An irrevocable oath, an agreement sealed between dozens of angels. The text describes Shemyaza standing before everyone and saying something similar to, "I fear that we alone are responsible for this sin. We will swear an oath, and we will all go down together." And there, on that celestial night, the Watchers made a forbidden pact, a pact sealed on Mount Hermon, which would later be called the Mount of the Oath. It was within this pact that the downfall of the group known as the Fallen Angels began, and Shemyaza became the leader of the greatest celestial transgression in history. When Shemyaza and the other Watchers descended to Earth, something profound happened. For the first time, celestial beings decided to experience human life. They began to teach knowledge that was previously exclusive to heaven. Shemyaza taught incantations, others taught metallurgy, magic, astrology, weapons, cosmetics, manipulation, knowledge that completely transformed humanity. And this is where the real impact of the story begins. Humans received information that they were not ready to understand. The world has changed. The purity of humanity has been corrupted. War, power, vanity, and spiritual secrets intertwined with a speed that should never have happened. And as a consequence, something even more disturbing emerged. The Nephilim, giants, hybrids, colossal beings born from the union between angels and humans. This monstrous lineage began to devastate the earth, destroying crops, ruling with brutality, consuming resources and imposing its dominion over mortals. Chaos spread. Violence has increased. The world was falling apart, and it all began Shemyaza. The sky, then, could no longer ignore what was happening. The rebellion had crossed the line. The Watchmen were out of control. The Nephilim ruled the earth. Humanity was on the brink of extinction, and it was at this moment of rupture that the most severe decision in spiritual history was made. Heaven would act. But before the final judgment, before the flood, before eternal imprisonment, something crucial happens to Shemyaza, something few know, something rarely mentioned. The world was plunging ever deeper into an abyss of violence and corruption. The presence of the Nephilim, hybrid giants, children of the Watchers, was beginning to leave a trail of destruction wherever they went. They dominated entire regions, enslaved humans, demanded sacrifices, and became brutal kings in kingdoms built through force and terror. The earth was no longer what it had been in the beginning, a pure, fresh place, full of life and potential. Now it was covered in blood, fear and disorder. Animals fled, crops disappeared, newly formed cities were crushed like nothing, and humanity, fragile, small, frightened, had nowhere to run, nowhere to. The prayers of men rose to the heavens like a desperate cry, a clamor that tore through the celestial silence. And then, for the first time in ages, heaven could no longer ignore the chaos caused by the angels who were supposed to protect, not dominate, humanity. A heavenly meeting was called, some advice, a divine court, a moment that would be remembered until the end of time. Ancient accounts describe archangels being sent to observe Earth and return with detailed information about the state of creation. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel witnessed everything. They saw what the Watchers had done. They saw human corruption. They saw forbidden powers. They saw the Nephilim devouring the earth. They saw violence multiplied 100-fold. And the verdict was inevitable. The Watchers had broken eternal laws. These were not rules created to control. They were principles that maintained the balance of creation, and Shemyaza, their leader, had led the greatest deviation in celestial history. The words that echo in the manuscripts are harsh and decisive. Shemyaza and his followers should be judged, and the earth should be purified. But there was a problem, a gigantic problem. One problem that made everything even more dramatic. Shemyaza did not want to surrender, and his followers neither. While the archangels prepared to descend to earth to capture the Watchers, Shemyaza was experiencing a devastating inner conflict. Guilt grew within him like a constant shadow. The security guards were losing control. Humans were suffering. The Nephilim were overstepping the mark. And all of this had begun with his oath. The texts describe how Shemyaza began to realize, too late, the gravity of what he had motivated. At first, he thought it was just a transgression, a forbidden act, but nothing that would alter the existence of the world. However, the union between angels and humans had created something unpredictable, something that even the Watchers themselves did not fully understand. He began to distance himself from the others. He began to reflect on what he had done. He began to question his own decision. And then a terrible truth fell upon him like a mountain. There was no turning back. It was too late to break the oath, too late to prevent the birth of giants, too late to avoid chaos. Shemyaza, the powerful leader of the Watchers, now carried a weight greater than the entire sky. When the archangels descended to earth, the landscape lit up with such intense force that even the Nephilim trembled. It was as if the sky had been torn open. Gabriel appeared as fire, Raphael as healing and judgment, Michael as absolute authority, Uriel as light that penetrated any darkness. And at that moment, the Watchers realized that judgment had arrived. Some tried to hide, others tried to defend themselves, and others simply fled. But there was one important detail. Shemyaza did not flee. He knew his fate was sealed. I knew I would be taken. He knew his rebellion had reached its limit, and this is where the story changes once again. According to tradition, Shemyaza tried to resist, not with force, but with supplication. He looked to the heavens and made a confession. He admitted his error. He declared repentance. He pleaded for his followers to be spared, claiming that the oath had been his idea, that the leadership had been his, that he should bear the brunt of the punishment. But heaven could not forgive. Not at that moment, not while the earth was being destroyed. His remorse wasn't enough. The verdict had already been decided, and the sentence would be irrevocable. The Nephilim were monstrous, giants that consumed everything, beings that dominated peoples, that terrorized villages, hybrids that should never have existed. Therefore, heaven decided to act severely. The archangels executed a harsh judgment upon them. The giants fought. They shouted Rugiram. The earth shook. The rivers filled with blood. The mountains trembled with the impact of the battle. The Nephilim fell one by one, and their souls, according to the texts, became wandering spirits, condemned to roam the earth until the end of time, giving rise, according to some traditions, to the evil spirits that torment humanity to this day. A dark fate, tragic, irreversible. And seeing that happen, Shemyaza succumbed emotionally. While the giants were being destroyed, the Watchers were about to be captured and chained. But Shemyaza made an unexpected decision, a decision that still divides scholars, mystics, and theologians today. He decided not to fight. Don't run away. Don't defend yourself. Instead, he became agitated. He rose high into the sky, and he did something that shocked even the archangels. Shemyaza launched himself back into the heavens, not to return as an angel, not to reconcile, but to avoid direct punishment. He rose to an unimaginable height, and there, between heaven and earth, he made his own oath. He would never come down. According to tradition, Shemyaza chose to remain suspended, bound not physically but spiritually, in a state of penance that would last until the end of all ages. He became a fixed, silent, observant presence, awaiting the day of final judgment, imprisoned not by chains, but by guilt, out of remorse, out of regret. While Azazel, the other great rebel leader, was condemned to be imprisoned deep within the earth, Shemyaza chose his own destiny, an eternity suspended between worlds. One of the most striking passages in the tradition recounts that, before disappearing into the heavens, Shemyaza uttered something to the sky, that he would carry the guilt forever, who acknowledged the mistake. He regretted having led his brothers into sin, and that he would accept eternal silence as payment for the rebellion he had started. These words echo like a lament lost in time, a confession not recorded in the standard texts of the Bible, a hidden story left in the shadows, preserved only in ancient manuscripts such as the Book of Enoch. And then Shemyaza disappeared. Only his spiritual shadow remained, watching, waiting, silent, present and absent at the same time, a defeated leader marked for eternity, trapped not in abysses, but in his own conscience. While Shemyaza disappeared, the other watchers did not have the same freedom. They were captured, tied up, chained, and they were thrown into deep caverns, hidden prisons, where they would remain imprisoned until the day of the great final judgment, when their definitive sentences would be declared. The suffering was indescribable, absolute silence, the darkness eternal. Meanwhile, the earth would face its own purification. With the Watchers imprisoned and the Nephilim destroyed, heaven made its final decision: wash the earth. There was no salvation left for that generation. There was no cure for corruption anymore. There was no turning back. And so begins the preparation for one of the greatest spiritual and historical events of all time, the flood. But before the water fell, before the world was reset, before humanity began anew, there was one final detail, a profound revelation, a crucial piece of evidence that showed Shemyaza's story was not over. Not even for him, not even for humanity. This part, the revelation that changes everything, will be told in Block 3, where we prepare for the climax of the video. The world was about to experience a silence unlike any before. The Watchers were imprisoned. The Nephilim had been destroyed. The celestial rebellion seemed to be over. But despite this, reality grew increasingly heavy, as if the earth itself were holding its breath before the final impact. It was as if every tree sensed it wouldn't survive, as if every creature knew something unparalleled was about to happen, as if the sky, heavy with intense dark clouds, was preparing the greatest answer in history. And above all, it was as if a name, the name of Shemyaza, echoed through the air, carrying with it the weight of the tragedy that was about to unfold. Despite being suspended, trapped in an unusual spiritual state, Shemyaza observed everything. There are two giants left: the arrest of his brothers, the despair of humanity, the approach of the flood. He knew the earth would be submerged. He knew purification was coming, and yet his spirit remained there, silent, motionless, contemplating the consequences his decision had produced. Shemyaza became a living symbol of that which could no longer be changed, a symbol of a rebellion that began with curiosity, grew with desire, and transformed into devastation. And even in that suspended eternity, he understood that there was a detail, a crucial detail, that connected his story to the future that was yet to come. As Shemyaza watched the world descend into chaos, one man became the last thread of hope: Noah. Noah was described as blameless in his ways, a man who somehow remained pure in a corrupt generation. He became the pivot between the end of one world and the beginning of another. But what few people know, what is almost never said, is that Noah did not emerge as an unlikely chosen one. He was protected, he was watched, he was accompanied. According to ancient traditions, Noah had already noticed the presence of the Nephilim. He had already witnessed their atrocities. He had already felt the weight of the Watchers' presence. And yet his heart remained steadfast. He refused to participate in the violence, the immorality, the distorted teachings brought by the fallen angels. Noah not only resisted, he silently fought against the spiritual corruption of his time, and for that reason it became part of the plan to restore humanity after the fall of the Watchers. Before the water fell, the archangels received special orders. orders that are rarely mentioned, orders that reveal a direct link between Shemyaza and everything that would happen afterward. They should, to purify the earth from the influence of the Nephilim, to seal away the corrupt teachings brought by the Watchers, to prevent the lineages of giants from surviving in the new world, to ensure that humans could restart history without the direct interference of fallen angels. But there was an exception, a small, subtle, almost imperceptible exception, something Shemyaza knew and feared. Not everything would be erased. Some seeds of knowledge remained. Some influences could not be completely eradicated. Some genetic, spiritual, and cultural traits would remain alive even after the flood. And Shemyaza knew this. He knew that, in a way, his impact would never completely disappear. There are ancient traditions, rarely mentioned, much debated, but shrouded in mystery, that suggest Noah's family was not only pure, but also chosen. Noah was different, and Shemyaza knew this. The Watchers knew this. The archangels knew this. Noah represented balance, the midpoint between the fragile human and the corrupted human. The link that would allow humanity to continue without repeating the mistakes of the giants. But here's the detail that completely changes the perspective of anyone observing the story. Shemyaza watched over Noah from the very beginning. Not because he saw him as an enemy, not because he saw him as someone destined to destroy the Watchers, but because Noah was special. He was different, special. He resisted corruption, not because he was too strong, but because his spirit was connected to heaven in a way that most men of his time did not understand. And this made Noah the absolute opposite of the Nephilim. While the giants represented excess, brute force, greed, and domination, Noah represented balance, humility, awareness, and preservation. There was no greater irony for Shemyaza than to see that the future of humanity was in the hands of someone whose soul reflected everything the Watchers should have been, but were not. Suspended between heaven and earth, Shemyaza watched the ark being built. He saw Noah being pursued. He saw the world mocking him. He watched humanity continue to sink into violence. And at that moment, Shemyaza understood something terrible. He had created the world that made the flood necessary. It was his pact, his rebellion, his teachings, and his influence that led the planet to chaos. But it was also his silent, albeit tragic presence that made Noah understand that something greater, something spiritual, was about to happen. Shemyaza could not interfere. I couldn't act. I couldn't talk to Noah. But the awareness of their guilt weighed so heavily on the world that Noah, in a way, felt the celestial urgency. And then the ark was finished. The storm has begun. The fountains of the deep have broken open, the waters rose, the rain fell like blades from the sky, and the entire earth plunged into liquid darkness. The screams stopped, the wars have ceased. The Nephilim no longer existed. The Watchers were imprisoned. Shemyaza remained suspended, watching everything disappear. A punishment that hurt more than any physical imprisonment. He saw creation being destroyed because of the choices he helped shape. The pain of this eternal contemplation became part of his very essence. When the waters began to recede, Noah and his family became the new builders of humanity. The earth was reborn, trees sprouted, animals emerged from the ark, the wind blew with freshness. But even in the new world, even after purification, the echo of Shemyaza remained. Not physically, not as a threat, but like a spiritual shadow, a mark left by the rebellion that would never be completely erased. And this mark would manifest itself in silent ways, in ancient legends about giants who survived, in cultures that spoke of gods who taught metallurgy, in stories about angels who visited humans, in traditions that described wars between superior beings, and even in ancient texts that spoke of wandering spirits tormenting humanity. The world had been reborn. But I wasn't completely free. The archangels tried to erase everything, But humanity is curious, persistent, insistent. Even after the flood, much of the knowledge that the Watchers brought back slowly resurfaced. Advanced astrology in ancient civilizations, surprising metallurgy among newly formed peoples, weapons before the expected time, magic, spells and secret rituals, mysterious symbols found in ancient temples, gigantic structures impossible for that time. All of this pointed to an uncomfortable truth. The Watcher's rebellion was never completely erased. She simply changed shape. His face changed. Times have changed. And Shemyaza, even while suspended, knew this. He knew his influence would return. He knew his story would reappear in fragments. He knew his name would be whispered in cultures around the world, hidden in myths and legends. And he knew that one day humanity would rediscover who he had been. What almost no one knows, and what sets the stage for the climax of this story, is that Shemyaza left something behind. Something that could not be destroyed by archangels, nor by the flood, nor by time. A warning, a legacy, a shadow that still influences humanity to this day. When the earth emerged again from the waters, silent and renewed, it seemed that everything had ended. But Shemyaza's story didn't end there. On the contrary, it was precisely in the aftermath of the flood that his legacy became even more mysterious. Shemyaza, suspended between heaven and earth, remained conscious. He wasn't dead. It wasn't turned off. It hadn't been forgotten. He was waiting, and this wait had a purpose. According to ancient traditions preserved in fragments, Shemyaza left one last gift, or perhaps a curse, hidden in creation, the spiritual memory of the rebellion. It was not a physical object. It wasn't an artifact hidden in caves. It wasn't a buried secret book. It was something much deeper, a spiritual trait that would transcend generations, awakening in humankind the eternal temptation of forbidden knowledge. And this trait, according to some ancient traditions, is the reason why humanity seeks to understand hidden mysteries. Distant civilizations suddenly developed advanced technologies. Ancient peoples erected impossible monuments. Religions emerged that spoke of beings coming from the sky. Cultures began to worship gods who taught the secrets of the earth. This impulse didn't come from nowhere. It was the shadow of ancient knowledge. It was an echo of the Watcher's teaching, era, or the legacy of Shemyaza. Now we come to the most important point in the story, the moment that answers the initial question, why was Shemyaza's story almost erased? The answer is as profound as it is disturbing, because, unlike Azazel, who became a symbol of the most violent corruption, Shemyaza represented something even more dangerous, the choice. Shemyaza did not fall out of hatred. He didn't fall because of ambition. He did not fall because he wanted to dominate heaven. He fell because he made a choice out of love for creation. A misguided, forbidden, devastating choice, but still a choice motivated by fascination, attachment, and closeness to humanity. This makes him dangerous because his downfall is not based on absolute evil, but in human error reflected in an angel. Shemyaza is the mirror of humanity, a being of light who succumbed not to evil but to weakness, and that's why her story is so unsettling. She reveals that the line between light and ruin is much thinner than one might imagine. If the story of Shemyaza were widely known, she would show the world that even beings of pure light can become lost, and forbidden knowledge always comes at a price. Shemyaza fell because he wanted to experience something that should never have been his, and the price was eternal. The end of the story is not the flood, not even in the vigilantes' prison, not even in the destruction of giants. The real ending hasn't happened yet. Ancient traditions state that Shemyaza remains suspended until the day of final judgment. On that day, he will be brought before the heavenly court, and then your future will be decided. Some texts suggest that it will be destroyed. Others suggest that he will be cast into eternal darkness. Others, even more mysterious, claim that there will be an individual trial, different from the others, because Shemyaza expressed remorse before his complete downfall. But all traditions agree on one point: Shemyaza will reappear at the end of times. And when that happens, humanity will finally have to confront the shadow of forbidden curiosity it has carried for thousands of years. The story of Shemyaza is not just about fallen angels. It's about responsibility. It's about desire. It's about consequences. And above all, it's about choices. Shemyaza reminds us that even beings of light can make mistakes. Even those in power can fall. Even those who know the eternal laws can go astray. And humanity, generation after generation, repeats this pattern. We seek forbidden knowledge. We want to go beyond limits. We open doors that we can't close later, because in a way, an echo of the Watcher's rebellion lives on within us. The moral of the story is simple and profound. Not all knowledge is ready to be revealed. Not every path should be followed. Not every door needs to be opened. True wisdom lies in knowing when to stop. Shemyaza didn't know when to stop, and he changed the destiny of the world. And now, knowing this story, you possess something that few have, an awareness of what happens when curiosity crosses the line of prudence. And now that you know the story that many tried to erase, now that you understand who Shemyaza was, why he fell, and how his shadow has traversed the ages to reach us, you no longer see the world the same way. And that's exactly what stories like this do. They wake up. They make you realize that there is much more hidden than revealed. The origins of humanity are shrouded in mystery. The spiritual world is profound, complex, and often disturbing. So before you leave this video, stop for a moment and reflect. If a single angel, by making a single choice, was able to change all of human history, what can your own choices build or destroy? Every decision is an echo that transcends generations. And your life is part of something much bigger, much deeper, much more spiritual than you imagine. If this video impacted you, moved you, made you think, then you need to know the story of Azazel, the other leader of the rebellion, the one who became a symbol of absolute chaos. If Shemyaza fell for love, Azazel fell due to total dominion. Click now on the video that appears on the screen and continue this epic journey through the hidden world that few dare to explore. Thank you for watching until the end. And remember, some stories weren't meant to be forgotten.